Right, my clock tells me that's 9 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and make a start this morning. So good morning and welcome to the Step Change in Safety Lifting Forum. Today we are looking at human factors in lifting.
Fine, is it? Oh, that's it.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes, no problem, Caroline.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just remind everyone to mute their microphone, and unless they're a speaker, of course, or if they have a question, if you could please turn off your camera so we can ensure the best quality call for everybody. And to remind you that this session is being recorded. On the permission of the speakers after the event, a copy of the slide deck will be sent to attendees. And with that, I will just go and make a start. So this is our agenda today. You see we have quite a range of speakers to get through in a couple of hours. So I'm going to sort of keep it moving. Forgive me if I kind of rush through things. But as ever, if you have any questions that perhaps occur to you after the event, or if we don't have time to answer it at the time, don't hesitate to contact me afterwards. I can compile them, put them to our experts, and get replies out to attendees. So with that, I will just pass over to Kenny Lottie, who is our award-winning co-chair of our lifting work group, for a brief introduction to today's session.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to you all. And if you happen to be looking in the chat, you'll see that we have got somebody who has joined from Mexico, and it is 3 a.m. in Mexico. So good morning to you, and welcome and thank you for joining us. As you can see from the agenda, and as Caroline says, it is very busy today, and we've a lot to get through. So I will just get off and allow Caroline to introduce Andrea, and we shall get off to our first speaker. I hope you all get something out today and we can speak again at the end. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thank you. So we have a range of speakers, either from the kind of lifting fraternity or from the human factors sort of area of expertise, and we're just going to finish today's session with Trevor Gregg from the HSE, who's actually going to just give us a general update and some topical information. Now you might have to bear with me. I'm going to see if I can share a short video with you. So the reason behind this video was to really just set the scene. So this is a short clip that has been put together by Dr. Marcin Nazaruk, who is a human factors specialist. Until recently, he was co-chair of our human factors work group. And I just wanted to play you a couple of minutes of this video to demonstrate kind of the transition from an old thinking of accident investigation and human factors as to the slightly more complex way that we view things today. So bear with me. Let's just hope this works, and you should have sound as well.
We'll start with a story. Two operators were lifting a large and heavy turbine inside a workshop. Suddenly, the turbine dropped and hit the floor, causing significant damage to the equipment. Fortunately, no person was injured. An investigation was conducted, and the why question was asked 5 times. The identified root cause was the operator's choice to use wrong tools for the lift. So there is nothing else left to do other than initiate consequence management to teach them a lesson. It's common sense, isn't it? They broke the rules and must face the consequences. That's all I had for you today. Thank you. Well, okay, maybe that's not the end of the story. Maybe there is more to it. When we look into the incident from the human factors point of view, things were not as simple. We found out that the operator is dependent on many other people to successfully complete the job. There was a manufacturing engineer responsible for designing how the product should be assembled and what lifting tools should be made available. This engineer did not have lifting expertise and preferred to rely on the operator's experience. In the result, the operators didn't have the tools they needed. But that's not the end of the story. There was an HSE manager who was responsible for selecting lifting training. She chose a generic off-the-shelf course, which did not cover more advanced techniques that operators needed for this lift. There was also a product engineer responsible for designing the new product and creating technical drawings, which should have, but didn't, information about the center of gravity, which you can imagine is very important in such big, complex lifts. So the operators were doing their best, given they didn't have tools, skills, and information that they needed. If we continue this questioning and inquiry, we could find that the competency management framework for engineers did not include lifting knowledge. So the engineers were not prepared to support lifting operations. We could see that the HSE manager didn't have the budget and skills to understand what specific training was needed, and that the product engineer was using software that didn't allow to indicate the center of gravity, which then could take us into the discussion about the role of IT and software procurement requirements. This story we started with is also a first lesson about what a system is. No person in an organization works in a vacuum, but rather every person is part of a network of dependencies. And the system is something where there are many parts that interact together.
So I'm just going to pause it there. So you could see there that, of course, the whole video, the whole tutorial there is available on YouTube. But I just wanted to use it because it introduces the thought of kind of, certainly when I was starting out in safety, you maybe do a 5 whys, and ultimately it might be, you know, come out with a conclusion that somehow some worker had done something wrong or not carry through with the correct action. Whereas now we have a much deeper understanding of human factors and everybody's part in a supply chain that kind of all culminates in an incident happening. So with that, I would like to introduce Andrea Sheriffs. So Andrea works for Wood and currently holds the position of HSE lead for the Middle East and Africa region. Andrea has previously worked in the oil and gas industry for almost 14 years, where she's worked with both onshore and offshore assets. Andrea has been a step change in safety focal point for the last 2 years and is making use of her current position to spread the word of the great work that Step Change do, thank you for that, internationally. I should also mention that Andrea has very kindly stepped up at the last minute to cover another speaker's presentation. So maybe just bear with us a bit, but thank you, Andrea, and over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could bear with me, it would be amazing. Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to present. It's 4 incidents we have around lifting incidents, or sorry, where human factors played part. Of the 4 incidents, there is a common theme around complacency. Sorry, not complacency, compliance. Sorry, communications and competence. So they all played part within these 4 incidents that I'll share. As I'm going through, I don't know, Caroline, if you want people to ask questions or hold off to the end, but yeah, I'm quite happy to take questions either way. Can you jump on to the first slide, please?
Yep, of course. So just whichever works best for yourself, Andrea.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the first incident we have is so it's an LTI. It was a dropped roof panel section. So what happened? So a roof panel section of a waste heat duct was being rolled due to it being upside down. Using a 2-point pick, the panel was raised to the vertical position and approximately 6 inches off the ground. As the piece was being set back down to the ground level, the rigging application, which was shake out hooks, separated from the load and the panel fell. At the point of the fall, the assigned rigger moved toward the load and placed himself in the line of fire, which resulted in him being pinned down from the waist. The duct was approximately 27.5 by 6.5 and weighed approximately £2,000. The investigation team, so what they found was that the work for this specific task had been occurring on and off for over a 2-week period prior to the actual incident. On the day of the incident, the crane 1, which was being used for this particular task, was in place, and 3 lifts were completed safely. The 3 lifts were rigged by a mechanical crew handling the assembly of the duct. Crane 1, which was used for the previous 3 lifts, had a capacity of was a 40-ton crane. Sorry, it was then relocated to another site, and then for this actual task where the incident occurred, they changed out cranes to a 75-ton truck, which also came with a new operator, rigger, and helper. So why did it happen? Our immediate cause, so improper use of tools and equipment. The procedure was known, but they weren't followed correctly. The personnel did deviate from a lifting plan, so there was a lifting plan in place on procedure, but they did deviate. And the root causes were inadequate comms by the work team, inadequate planning and implementation, and infrequent performance of skills. I don't know if anyone's got any questions there, or if not, I can just jump into the next one. No? Okay, perfect. Okay, our second one was a restricted work case. So this specific incident is a crane. It was in Brazil, sorry. So sorry, I can see a question. What's an LTO? So it's a lost time injury, so like a lost work case. So yeah, so a restricted work case, this one was, sorry, Brazil, and it was where a crane contacted an individual's leg. So what's happened within this incident, so there was a heavy piece of metal, which was approximately 85 kgs. It was being transported to a workbench by a small crane and by a group of workers. While moving the crane into position, the movement of the weight caused the crane to tip over. The injured party attempted to stop the crane falling by using both of his hands above his head, which resulted in one of the crane legs hitting the IP's left leg, pressing him against the workbench, causing a bruise on the knee and a cut on the back of his leg. The investigation team identified that the working environment was not well planned for the high level of work that was being carried out within the workshop, and the qualifications of the workers involved with the load movement was not considered. This, together with the pressure for delivering, created the environment for unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. So they were under pressure to deliver on time. The worker put himself in the line of fire just instinctively, which has resulted in him being injured. So why did it happen? So the immediate causes were, again, improper use of tools and equipment. Again, the procedures were known but not followed correctly, and the area was congested. As you can see from the picture, it's not it's not a big picture, but you can see it's a congested area and there's not much space for movement. The deviations from procedure, so personnel deviated from the known procedure, and our root causes were inadequate planning and implementation, inadequate comms between the management and the working team, and infrequent performance of skills and/or training. Any questions on this incident? Okay. So our third one, so yeah, it's an LTI, so it's a lost time injury, and this one is a dropped panel from a forklift truck. This incident happened, so this happened in Texas. So what happened with this incident? So we had a work party who were tasked, they were flipping an 8 by 20 steel electric panel rack that was sitting on 4 pipe stands. The approximate weight of the panel was 2,225 pounds. An operator attempted to lift the panel off the jack stands using a forklift and to maneuver into a vertical position, while a foreman and the injured party stood on opposite ends of the panel to hold the load in place using their hands. The forklift knocked the load, causing it to fall. The IP instinctively moved in front of the panel to stop it from falling. This resulted in the panel falling onto his leg, spinning him to the ground, and caused multiple fractures to his leg and ankle. So why did it happen? Immediate causes were poor line of fire risk awareness, procedure was not understood, and improper use of tools and equipment. The deviations from the procedure where the personnel deviated, so there was a known procedure, it was in place, but they deviated from the actual procedure. And our root causes were inadequate hazard identification, inadequate planning and procedure, poor supervisory example, and lack of pre-task communication. And our final incident, it was a first aid case. So this was a dropped metal signboard. So for this incident, we had a lifting team they used a 50-ton crane to lift a welding machine from the top floor of a construction building to the ground floor. There's a small sketch there, so you can kind of see the scenario of how the incident panned out. So yes, so they were moving using a 50-ton crane, to lift a welding machine from the top floor to the ground floor of this construction building. When the rigger raised his arms to remove the sling from the load, the gesture was misunderstood by the crane operator for him to raise the lifting sling. This causing the auxiliary crane hook to dismount the metal signboard, which was on the side of the building there, to fall off and hit the IP. The incident, the investigation identified that the ad hoc lifting of non-critical lifts was not taken seriously by the lifting team to make sure that the fundamental safety measures for lifting such an exclusion zone, the measures such as an exclusion zone, pre-lift inspections, pre-task talks, toolbox talks were put in place before performing any lifts. Furthermore, the crane operator was just joining the team for 2 days in such complex and congested work site. Poor communication of crane operator and signalman meant that the crane operator misunderstood the hand signaling of the signalman, which inadvertently resulted in him manoeuvring the crane when in error, which resulted in the metal signboard falling. Identically, the metal signboard was installed with small screws and it became rusty. So why did it happen? The immediate causes: a failure to appreciate the risk, inadequate protection devices, deviations, so no lift plan or pre-lift inspection was conducted. Under root causes: inadequate hazard identification, inadequate implementation of procedures, inadequate understanding of communications, and poor management of change. Next slide, please, Caroline. So as I said at the beginning, we identified some common themes through these 4 incidents. One being compliance, so cutting corners, the lack of compliance with procedures, lift plans, etc. Communication, so there was a lack of communication run throughout these incidents by supervision. And when a task is transferred to one party to another, or when maybe there's a new team member join a work party. And then competence, so lack of competent personnel. So we need to ensure that before we assign personnel a task, that they're actually competent to carry out the task as well. And all of these, so the compliance, the communication, and the competence, all of which are underpinned by the culture set. Next slide, please. So now we know, we know that these play a big part, and it's important that we try and mitigate these factors as much as possible. So on compliance, the reasons for the cutting the corners and the situations where cutting corners could be more likely are mainly found due to the situational organisational factors. For example, there was time pressure, the workload, the staffing levels, the training, supervision, and availability of resources. Violations are highly susceptible to management influence, as most underlying causes of violations are created by management, accepted by management, or condoned as normal working practices. So when there's a lack of compliance, we need to be sure that we speak to people openly and we put ourselves in their shoes. It's almost like don't ask people to do something that you wouldn't be. It's not acceptable for you to do yourself. And be proactive and speak to people. And ask the questions around about time allocations, workload, resources, training, etc. And when we look at communication, the key principles in safety critical communications is identifying who needs to be part of the communication, who needs to know what, be aware of also communication overload as well. We need to also consider the means that we communicate, so whether it be face-to-face, radio, verbal, written, and consider the timings of the communications as well. Again, a big thing is we need to consider the language barriers also. Highlight safety critical steps within procedures and drawing attention to them during training and referring to key parts of procedures as well. It's really important to get the message across, considering using 2 or more methods of media, so whether it maybe be a video followed up by verbal, but using that 2 points of communication as well. And remembering always that putting signs up is not a substitute for communication as well. And then when we look at competence, it's the ability to undertake responsibilities and perform activities to a recognised standard on a regular basis. A combination of skills, experience and knowledge, the inadequate management of competence has not only contributed to disasters such as Texas cities, but also to fatalities, personal injuries and ill health. And then the culture. So many companies talk about safety culture and when referring to their employees to comply with the rules or act safely or unsafely. However, we find that the culture and style of management is even more significant. For example, for natural unconscious bias for production over safety, or a tendency to focus on the short term and being highly reactive. Success normally comes from a good leadership, good worker involvement and good communications. So the largest influences on safety culture are the management commitment and style. Are they approachable? Do they walk the talk? Employee involvement, participation and consultation, training and competence. We know, and obviously, and there is a big difference between these 2 words, training and competence. And communication is one of the many non-technical skills, and it's the most important. So we don't get many training courses on communication, but it can be one of the most important things that you do throughout your day. Compliance with the procedures, and then organizational learning. So making sure that learnings are cascaded across the business, but not also cascaded. It's actually making sure that we are actually learning from our learnings as well. And that is me, unless we have any questions.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. I wonder if we have any questions from the floor, or I'm aware that we have a few human factors specialists in the call. I wonder if you had any thoughts or commentary on that.
If I can jump in, Carlin, Kenny here.
Of course.
Just, I think we can relate all those incidents back to the short video you showed at the start, where before each and every one of us may perceive that the people carrying out the operation were the only ones at fault. But if we take into consideration that management have a duty of care to their employees to make sure they do things safely, where was that management shown in these incidents? What did they done to make sure things were going to be done safely? Because we know if we continuously do the same operation time after time after time, become complacent. If we've been doing it wrong all the time, wrong suddenly becomes correct. So we need to really speak to our supervision and our management and make sure that they keep reiterating to the workforce that they expect them to work to the procedures and expect them to work safely and question anything, so that it doesn't become habit, it doesn't become the norm. So I think it ties back very well to that first safety video. That's all from me.
Thank you. Any other further comment or questions? If there's nothing immediate, I kind of had one myself. I hope that's all right. I'm not a lifting or a human factors expert, but just for me, kind of looking at it as an outsider, when you have something like inadequate understanding of communication and maybe hand signals that were misinterpreted, is it possible just to not have hand signals that also look like kind of regular day gestures? Do you know what I mean? Sort of almost take it back to, well, you don't want to kind of scratch your nose and accidentally have something lowered on you. Like, do you know, if they're so just, it's the design of the hand signals in the first place is, I guess, what I'm getting
Unfortunately,
at. So,
Caroline,
is it oversimplifying it?
The hand signals are detailed within British standards and various other places, but they're detailed within British standards. But the thing that here that possibly could prevent everything is there's only supposed to be one person, the banksman. He's supposed to be easily identifiable to the crane operator, and he is the only person he takes signals from. If
Yes.
the banksman is not easily identified and people are waving their hands about, it would become very hard for the crane operator
Right.
to even
Or
fathom
yeah,
what
making it
signal
clear
is
when
being
you're
communicated to him.
yes. So making it clear who is the only person to take instruction from in terms of hand signals when they started a kind of maneuver and when they finished the maneuver of a hand signal. Sorry,
Definitely.
forgive
And
me, I had to ask.
the majority, well, in fact, I think everybody in the offshore industry these days have got high-vis waistcoats, usually for their banksman, and it's identified in the back as banksman, so people know who is in charge and who is giving the signals.
Yes, I guess from my thought, I'm thinking the human factors and getting back to the design. So I see that a lot of it is so embedded that it's unlikely to change. However, I think these things should still be open to consideration. You know, if incidents continue to occur because of them, so it's just kind of taking that extra step back, I guess. Okay, if we don't have any further questions just now, thank you very much for that, Andrea, and hopefully you will stay with us for our expert panel session at the end. So next I would like to introduce Colin Duncan from Harbour Energy. Colin joined Sparrows from the automotive industry in 2002 and worked as a project engineer in Aberdeen for a number of years before moving to support Sparrows' international operations. On return from the Far East, Colin joined ConocoPhillips UK as the Lohler TA and followed the lifting SME role through subsequent integrations to Chrysaor and Harbour Energy. So with that, passing over to you, Colin.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction there, Caroline. So what I'm going to talk about this morning is human factors and how they get involved with lifting investigations. And I need to make it clear right from the start, this is purely a viewpoint from a tech head. I'm not a human factor specialist. I've come across human factors as more important. So the importance of human factors is come in over the last couple of years with our investigations. So we thought, go take a little bit of a break here. Let's just write down and sort of like collect our thoughts and get them down there. And let's just see if this resonates with anyone else. But it's about this. So this little presentation is about human factors in lifting investigations. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a near miss that we had. No one was hurt, no loads were dropped, but it was observed and a really good learning opportunity here. So just setting the scene, this is an actual incident, this is an actual occurrence. At some point last year, we had this incident happen. It was a typical day of deck operations. There was fair weather and good daylight. and the people involved were actually a very experienced team. So our experienced core crew slinger, he'd been on the asset for a number of years. The materials man was involved. He had like a stage 1 banksman slinger, and he'd been on the asset for a number of years. And a stage 3 crane operator, again, core crew. But we also had an ad hoc experienced banksman. Now, this was the first time this person had been on the asset, and he was 7 days into his trip. So it's fairly typical that we have to, at times, bring in ad hoc experienced people to backfill core crew members. So if we go to the next slide, please. So where we've got the yellow star, that's the banksman had been up on that level above where the actual incident occurred. He had been working with a slinger up there, and they had moved an open top container from that upper level down to the lower level where the blue square is, for it to be unloaded. Now the top picture is actually a photo directly from the crane cab, so we've got plenty of visibility for the crane operator to see what's going on. Lots and lots of space around, or relative amounts of space around the area for the work party to work on. So the banksman can see clearly, the crane operator can see clearly, and the two people down on that lower deck had plenty of space to work in. So we can go to the next slide. So the actual task was to remove a pallet of grating out of an open top. A fairly straightforward construction type task. And then once it actually unloaded it, they were then going to return the open top back up to where it had come from, the upper deck. Now, the palletized gratings, they had been loaded. They'd been loaded with a forklift in the yard. Yeah. And normally on the asset, what they do is they use a container ramp, and they come up with a pallet truck and lift the pallet of grating out, and they would just take it out. And there would be no crane operations involved with actual unloading. But as you can see from the pallet, with the overhang, the pallet's actually undersized for the load. So it's been packed like that on the beach and sitting offshore. So that didn't allow them to actually use their normal unloading method. So what they thought is, right, okay, we have within our routine lifting plan, we have the steps for slinging up loads and pulling them out of the lifting things out of open tops. We'll go for that, and that's allowable within the remit of the plan and the permit. So they made that decision. So off they go. We'll go to the next slide, please. They slung up the pallet. A couple of slings around there, and then they actually started lifting it up. Now, what they didn't do is they didn't remove the sling set from the open top. And as they got up the load up to about chest height, it was apparent that the load was starting to get messed up within the sling set of the open top. So this is the point where they should really have stopped and reassessed. They shouldn't. Ideally, they wouldn't have got that far, but this is the point where it's been a missed opportunity to stop and reassess. So what happened next, with all best intents, the slinger grabbed a load handling pole and stepped into the open top with the load up at chest height and tried to push one of the slings out the way with the load handling pole, try to push the back sling out the way. That wasn't working because you still had the front sling. So then the materials man, deciding I can help here, picked up a scaffolding board, stepped inside and tried to use a scaffolding board to clear the other sling. At that point, they woke up to themselves and realised, hang on, got out the container and asked for it to be put back down. Like I say, no one hurt, but they got themselves into a very dangerous situation there. They put the pallet back down. They then reassessed the job and unclipped all the banding from the pallet and basically manual handled all the gratings out. So it was actually some good points there, and they actually recognised themselves that they'd gone too far and they reported it. And then they managed to find a safe way to actually get the task done. But from there, we actually took this one as, right, hang on, we have a free learning here. Let's go and chase this one up and work it through our incident investigations as if it had been worse consequences. Okay, so go to so we started off typical. When we have any sort of incident investigation, it started off, right, okay, I'm getting the phone call, there's various other people getting the phone call, safety guys getting the phone call, and we're starting to get together as a team, and it's very much a technical team that's been pulled together with the old, as we've been calling it, the technical inquisition. Yeah, what's gone wrong? Yeah. That's your phone calls with the OIM and phone calls with supervision and sort of like, and I'm sure you've all got plenty of examples of it. Right, hang on, let's bring in the big guns straight away. But what we did do, since we had a bit of a free learning here, we went, right, we've got some experience with our human factors specialists. Let's bring them into the team and get them involved with the investigation at an early stage. And that was absolutely beneficial. Because without having the human factors involved, we could have easily have turned this into, we don't want to use the word the witch hunt, but it could have been down the way of just blaming the individuals and not getting the depth of learning that we actually eventually got out of this. So what we did, we ran it through the three factors that are involved with human factors. We've got the individual factors, job factors, and organizational factors. And we ran it as if it had been a more serious incident, because the potential was there. So out of the individual factors, what popped out was there was no malicious intent involved with this. It was a problem-solving attitude and intuitive decision-making which actually focused the individuals on the immediate task. It was a series of small steps got them into a situation where suddenly there's two people inside an open top with a load above them, or load at chest height, shoulder height. They hadn't started the task intending to do that, but it had been that focusing on the immediate task in front of them caused them to lose sight of the overall picture. But what we also found as well is that there was some core crew and ad hoc team dynamics going on here. The two guys stepping in there, that was done under full observation of the banksman and of the crane operator. But they didn't intervene. In this case of why. Then when we looked at the job factors, well, the obvious job factor there was that the load had been sent in a condition that was actually unsuitable for the platform to handle how they normally handled. We actually follow the oil and gas safe cargo guidelines. What they should have done was actually started off, well, there's various ways of getting that out, but ultimately if we have a load arriving on our assets that we can't actually unload safely, we close the doors, put in a non-conforming cargo ticket and round trip it. So if you don't do that, yeah, you're going to keep getting the stuff out. Another fact that we've found, and it seems obvious in hindsight, that it's very easy to step into an open top. Yeah, we have half heights. They're difficult to step into. You can't step into. You've got to climb into it. You've got to make that conscious decision that you're going to climb into something. But an open top itself, with those doors open, it's just a step in, and you're basically potentially stepping into a dangerous situation. The other job factors that we looked at was there was no immediate stop the job triggers. They weren't apparent. They hadn't actually discussed at the toolbox talk of at what point will we stop. And a key one would have been don't step into an open top container in the midst of a lift. But then taking that further back at the organisational factors, we actually found that we needed to put into our procedure clearly define that open tops and half heights, we're considering them as virtual red zones now. We run this via consultation with our routine lifting forms, etc. We also looked at green hats and this interaction between core crew and ad hoc. So we've actually gotten a specific lifting induction sheet. And the question set and all the points have been developed with the assets offshore rather than just being an additional burden. It's some pretty pointed questions within there. And we've also added in within our standard toolbox, within our lift plans and the toolbox talk sheet, we've added in a line there for people to actually write down your stop the job triggers. So that's various things we've done on the back of it. But out the back of this, as we sort of like, it was me initially sort of like sitting back and going, okay, where's human factors coming here? And sort of ran through a few other people here. So there's a couple of pitfalls that, looking back on incident investigations, that we want to just sort of like put out there and see if these resonate. Right, so one of the ones here is most of us on here, we've been employed for our technical abilities. We haven't been employed for our interviewer skills. And when you get involved with an investigation, a lot of it is the interviews. On a day-to-day basis, we're asked for our judgment and opinions. Does that actually make us too quick to judge? Also, I mean, these are observations. Another one is, yeah, as an industry, we still tend to start off any sort of incident with that knee-jerk, right, technical inquisition, let's go. Because it ties in nicely with what we do. We make judgments. And then again, as technical experts, we can have I find this a lot, and it's not just within the lifting world. We can have a tendency to jump ahead to findings if there's a really clear breach. So I saw there was an exclamation mark popped up. People are seeing clear breaches. Yeah. It's really easy to jump ahead to your findings and go, oh, right, you should never have been in there. And particularly if you're the actual procedure owner, you're going, well, hang on, that's, you know exactly where that breach is. But one of the other things to watch out for is if you're having to jump through a procedure to point out a breach to someone, is your procedure that clear? And also, yeah, employing companies, I mean, all of these, all the personnel involved with this one, this particular near miss, they were all service company personnel. They weren't Harbour Energy employees, they were all core crew, apart from the ad hoc person. But it also means that the employing companies may be running their own investigation. You need to make sure if that's happening that you're aligned, because you don't want to be going down one approach with all the human factors to find that the employing company is maybe not as far ahead. You need to get the employing company involved. Can we go to the next slide, please, Caroline? Right. Okay. Just to sort of like summarise this one. So, like I said, this was a viewpoint from a tech head, non-human factor specialist. But what we've got from our investigations is technically oriented investigators may, by nature, be very judgmental. And is it? I don't think it's just a lifting community feature. We find that the process engineers are very much process orientated. Everything's a breach of process, but it's just something to watch out for. Also, with the purely technical investigations, they may inadvertently focus on individual behaviour rather than organisational and situational factors. So one of the key things that the human factor specialists keep on sort of like hammering home to us and kept on pulling us back and saying, have we set the team up to fail or succeed? Is there anything we could have done as an organisation to make sure that we've done everything we can to make sure that the team are set up to succeed? Now, a little clue here. If you're doing an investigation and you're having to jump through numerous procedures and cross-references and sub-clauses to find what the breach is more than likely an organisational factor in that your processes and your procedures are not as clear as they need to be. Another key point, be very aware of the human factors at work within the investigation team and not just the incident members. The investigation team, there's lots of human factors going on there as well. Keep an eye on yourselves as you're doing an investigation. And then where you have it available, I cannot stress enough, consider drafting your human factor specialist into your investigation at the earliest point. Okay, so we're not alone. Yeah, if you're sitting there as an operator and you're thinking, I don't actually have a human factor specialist within your organization, go to Step Change. Step Change has some really, really good documentation. And this one came out, I think it was last year this one came out. And I've got some extracts from the Human Factors and Performance material. This is all available on the Step Change website. So just go to the next slide, please. So within there's actually some summaries of human factors in incident investigation. I'm not going to go through these. But what I'm going to do is just point out that there are resources available to you. Make yourself aware of them. Have a look at it. See if any of it resonates with yourself and with investigations you've been involved with in the past. Yeah. So again, there's various slides there that can help out with this. Okay. Any questions?
So again, just open to the floor, and also if any human factors specialists would like to provide commentary.
Colin, it's Jared here. Listening to your case study there, and it just struck me when the guys started to struggle. It took them a little while to actually realise that they should turn about face and do something different. But I thought it was really good that you took the opportunity to use that as a learning experience. And I think you almost maybe a little bit stingy with the way that you framed it and said it was about investigations, because the way that when I was listening, I was thinking was what you've done is it's more than investigations, the way that you've actually used it, because it was about, okay, how can we be more proactive? And I think that's what we're striving for is, yeah, we've been looking at human factors at the end of incidents for a while now, but where we really want to be is, we want to be ahead of the game. We want to be proactive, and we want to be looking at this stuff to prevent it. So yeah, I think great job, and yeah, I really enjoyed that.
That's great, thank you. Martin?
Yeah, good day, everyone. Martin Veert here from INEOS Human Factors. I found the story really relatable. In my former incarnation as a wireline hand, most of my equipment was sent out in open baskets of one form or another. So I appreciate that. But the point I really wanted to sort of follow up is the role of the human factors expert when it comes to the actual investigating team. You hinted at something there, Colin. So would you like to enlarge upon the role of human factors and how we can moderate the sort of like, or facilitate the team in their line of investigation?
Yeah, so that's a good point, in that our human factors, so we've got a variety of human factor specialists, but the particular one who was involved with this, Lucy, unfortunately, she's not here today. But by bringing her in, she helped frame the question set, and if anything, it was sort of like providing guiding reins, and she, what we were getting is sort of like, and we heard it quite a bit, it was sort of like, right, this might be a dumb question, however, and it's taking that step back and asking the obvious questions, the basic questions. At times, that's what needs to be asked, and it's beyond the why, but also the skill set when it comes to interviewing people. Now, for me, I find it difficult to ask or I can ask an open question, but I very, very quickly start getting to closed questions. And I think that's a characteristic of people who are technical. We quite often jump ahead. By having that human factor specialist, we're much more open-minded, and keeping the open questions going till a point of when we can then start focusing it down into very, very pointed closed questions. It was that the moderator, the kind of moderator role, but also steering us through the process to make sure that we had investigated every sort of like feasible avenue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. And is it Shady?
Yeah, hi, good morning. This is Shady from Milan. No, I found this very interesting and something Colin touched about contractors and partners. So my challenge is like, how do you infiltrate or pass this know-how or do it from contractual terms that your partners or contractors would adhere to this system called human factor? As you're aware, it's not something tangible. And you correctly mentioned that we need to engage our contractors. At the end of the day, the service providers are so many, and there may always be a gap. So what terminologies or what things may be, what is the approach in this perspective? Thank you.
Yeah, it's always a difficult one, that one, in that we have to very, very quickly start speaking to legal people and make sure that that we are not going to be into any kind of breach of contractual breach, etc. But that it's all kind of streamlined at the moment for the ones I've been involved with. But it's having that open, honest discussion with your contractors, and you've got to have it happening regularly and not just when the bad stuff happens. You need to be building up that relationship with your core service companies, having that engagement, so that when it comes to something like this, you know you've got each other's backs, and you're all aligned. But there is no sort of like one solution that fits all that. Communication would probably be the thing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And then just a brief one for myself, Colin. So you were very proactive in sort of investigating what was, I guess, a high potential near miss. However, how do you kind of integrate human factors on day-to-day kind of work within your organization rather than just when incidents occur?
So within the lifting world, we've been doing a lot with our routine lifting forum, and we've just gone through a whole exercise where we have trimmed down all our permits. And what we've actually done is that, for instance, our routine lifting permits, we've trimmed them down. But what we've done is actually documented what good looks like, so that when the permit offices try to build it back up again, we're actually giving people the tools to be able to resist things like that. It's communication tends to be the thing. I mean, we've got a bunch of things that have come out of this. What we don't want is 10 pages in a procedure. We want something which is immediate to the work party, particularly at the toolbox top.
Yeah, so you are sort of proactive even in routine tasks. You're already tackling the human factors there by simplifying things and making them clear.
Absolutely. So I mean, it's with the wood presentation before. I would say, with the exception of the last one, everything else looked like would probably be classed as some sort of like routine operation to the people working it. Possibly even the last one as well. I mean, this is a classic example of a routine operation, and this comes up time and time again. That if you have a complex operation where you've defined every single step, there's possibly less room for people to go and do things wrong. Whereas if it's a routine operation, people's mindsets move.
No, that's great, thank you. And just something I've found sort of looking at human factors as our Q2 theme for this year within Step Change in Safety, it's been quite difficult to kind of position the information that we can provide to our members. Some organizations like yours, Colin, large organization, in-house people, specialists, etc. But we also have members, that are kind of at the beginning of their human factors journey. And like Shady, perhaps even having to justify something that's sort of less tangible. How do you demonstrate that to your senior leaders that it's worth investing in? So everyone is at kind of a different level, so it can be difficult to provide useful information to everybody. So I will just move on with that. So our next speaker I'd like to introduce, we have Dr. Jared Dempsey from Cognivate. Jared is an industrial psychologist who has spent over 20 years researching, teaching, and consulting in the area of human behavior and human factors. The last 10 years have focused on oil and gas projects, including over 5 years working on rotation on oil rigs and platforms. He's passionate about making human factors accessible and useful for everybody. And with that, over to you, Jared.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about human factors. Okay, it probably won't surprise any of you to realise that as a psychologist, I've never picked up a push-pull stick, I've never been at the end of a tagline or operated a lever on a crane. However, I do believe that most of the issues that we'll face on a day-to-day basis, whatever our role is, will be related to the human factor. And today, we'll talk about some simple principles of human performance that can be applied so we can be safer and have more reliable operations in the area of lifting and elsewhere. A few months ago, I met a company man and he said to me, human factors, all you hear is human factors. What the heck, apart from he didn't say heck, is human factors? And they should imagine there's a few people here in this virtual room who feel the same way. And what human factors is really depends on who you speak to and how they define human factors. For example, at the moment, I'm reading a novel about spies and counterintelligence. Its title is The Human Factor, and it's got absolutely zero in it that you would find in a book on the discipline and the field of human factors. So to Graham Greene, the novelist who wrote the book, the human factor would be about trust, intrigue, and shady deals between MI5 agents sitting on park benches. And if you spoke to someone from a training company who did personality assessments, then they might tell you that human factors is all about how having green personality types and red personality types, they would have to be trained so they interacted better with each other considering their personality. And if you spoke to someone from HR, they might start saying how the human factor is all about making sure you select and recruit the right people. And of course, in some way, they'd be right, or right-ish. And if we were playing hide and seek, I'd say that they were getting warm. Another way of putting it is that they'd get you on the ballpark. But my aim today is not only get you on the ballpark, but to get you up in the goal mouth. So you have a really firm grasp of this thing called human factors, why it's important and how it can help. And I think referring to the co-speakers today, we've already come some distance in that aim and that objective. But what I want to do is really just have a very basic primer on human factors. So what you might consider to be a human factors 101, where we demystify this thing of human factors. Next slide, please. Okay, so first of all, it's not a dark art. Next slide. It's not rocket science. Next slide, please. And it's not brain surgery, although there are some simple principles about the way that the mind works that can help us think about and structure our work. Okay, so I've been speaking for a few minutes now, so I think it's about time we change things up a bit. You will all remember playing Spot the Difference when you were kids. The next slide will show two pictures side by side. Now, if we just hold that slide right there, you'll be able to see that at first they look identical, but let me assure you there are some subtle differences. Your challenge, and it would be helpful if you use a pen and a piece of paper, is to try and spot the difference between those two pictures. Okay, so I'm going to give you 60 seconds. And when I say go, I want you to start to see if you can capture as many differences as you can. So, go. Okay, you're halfway through. 15 seconds to go. Five seconds. And let's stop. Okay, Carolyn, if we could go to the next slide now. Okay, so let's see how we did. We'll start going from left to right. Did you notice the extra window in the red brick building? Or did you notice the chap wearing the different coloured t-shirt? If we go up to the top of the tower, then in one picture there is a red versus a green flag. And in another difference, there is actually a missing flagpole. As well, if we go down to the bottom of the tower, there's a whole entire person missing at the center. In addition, if we look to the right, then we have someone with a different colored baseball cap. And for extra bonus points, well done if you notice the missing lamppost. Okay, so we've had a bit of a break there and mixed things up. So let's crack on. I'm going to make a statement now. And the statement is that human factors is, if we were thinking in the wider sense of the word, is about making things easy, pleasing, and safe. So to think about easy and pleasing, one of the reasons that Apple can charge a premium is not only because they market well, but their products have a reputation for being easy to use. So they're intuitive, they're pleasing to look at, and they're pleasing to handle. But for most of us, human factors experts in our industry and similar industries, what we're really interested in is getting things to go right more often. We want things to be easy and safe. On the flip side, the other way of looking at it is we want less unplanned events. So for example, we want less mechanical failure, less unplanned discharges, and most definitely less people getting hurt. So if we go to the next slide now, please. Okay, because we've been quite a quiet bunch, I'm not going to ask you to tell me about something that you did, but I'll ask you a question. Have you ever been in a situation where something has happened probably because of something that you did or did not do? And you've thought to yourself, how on earth am I going to be able to tell my boss, my partner, my teammate about this? And I should suspect that everybody on this call has had that thought at some point or another, because we all get things wrong and sometimes in quite spectacular ways. So I'm going to tell you about an unplanned event of my own that led to an awkward conversation. It's a bit of a confessional, if you like. Okay, so if we go to the next slide. A few years ago, my teenage daughter asked me to get a record player for her birthday. Vinyl was making a comeback and records were cool again. So I ended up buying her a record player. Now, while the sound wasn't lousy, to me it also didn't sound great. However, my daughter thought the record player was absolutely superb, and the day after her birthday, she was planning to bring her best home from school and show off the new record player. So off she went to school, and I was listening to the record player, and I felt that it was just lacking something in the bottom end. Then I had an idea. I had a couple of old speakers that looked a bit more meaty. So I switched out the speakers and I connected up my bigger, better, and much improved speakers instead. As I listened to the music with the newly attached speakers, my foot started tapping, my head started nodding, and that bottom end seemed to come right in. So it sounded superb. That was until the music started to slow down and warble. I then looked over at the record player, and if memory serves me correctly, I saw a thin wisp of smoke coming from the turntable. I immediately isolated the power supply, sat with my head in my hands, and wondered how on earth am I going to be able to tell my daughter that I've killed her record player. Okay, next slide, please. When I killed the record player, I selected the wrong speakers. When you think of it, most of the unplanned events that we could speak about, and if you think of your most recent lifting incidents, will be related to one of 6 action errors. That's wrong selection, wrong order, wrong amount, wrong position, wrong time or timing, and not done when something should have been done. So let's take a couple of minutes just to look at those 6 action errors in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So if we just go to the next slide. Okay, so spare a thought for the poor fellow who ordered an 8-foot Santa for his garden online, which when it arrived was a 25-foot Santa, and it actually made it difficult to see out of any of his windows over the festive period. Next slide, please. So we can at times, if we're not careful, end up with the wrong amount of something. It can be down to something like a typo or misplacing a decimal point or making a miscalculation. And we can take a fairly wide view of wrong amounts. Some keywords are too big, too small, not enough. We can think about amounts of force, liquid, materials, or whatever. And if we think about lifting, then obviously weight comes to mind. Next slide, please. Okay, how about wrong order? Let me ask you, when you make a cup of coffee, do you add the water or the milk first once you put the coffee in? Now, I'm going to guess that 99% of you add the water first, but there are people who do it in a different order because they say that if you add the boiling water, it will burn the coffee. Okay, next slide, please. So we can do things in a preferred order or a wrong order. And the order we do things does make a difference. For example, if we're changing bolts on a flange, then what we might not want to do is work in a circular direction, but go crisscross. The same thing is if we end up going in the wrong order, we can end up double handling containers. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, moving on to wrong time. Here's another unfortunate soul, a holiday maker who turned up at the airport a year early after booking their ticket for the wrong date. They were on holiday and trying to get back home. And to make things worse, being a generous sort, that they had given the last of their foreign currency to the taxi driver that had dropped them off at the airport. Next slide, please. So we know that timing is important. We could be too soon, too late, or even do something too fast or too slow. Now, when I say that we can do things too slow, I'm not referring to get people to rush, but there are jobs that have a limited window of opportunity. You know, if you're working with cement or cattle oil or something like that. And if we're thinking about lifting and safety, then we might think about slowing down a new team member who's too eager to approach a tagline before the lift is stabilized and the load is at or below waist height. Next slide, please. Okay, what does this slide look like to you? What does it make you think of? An anniversary, perhaps? I wonder how many of us have forgotten an anniversary, a birthday, or another important date, and then been faced with an awkward conversation. Next slide, please. Forgetting not to do something or not doing something because you don't realize it needs to be done can lead to difficult conversations at home and at work, whether it's forgetting to attend a meeting, performing a job step, or doing a vital routine daily check. Okay, and here we have an official from Mumbai taking
Oh, Jared, I'm afraid you cut out then. Sorry, Jared, I'm afraid I can't hear you.
Yes, I think we've all lost him, Carling.
Okay, so you still have the rest of the group. That's good.
I'm hearing you anyway.
Sorry, Jared, we lost your audio there. Can you hear us? I'm afraid we can't hear you, Jared. It may be worth leaving the call and rejoining. Jared, could you hear us? Oh, I see you've gone on to mute now, Jared. Are you able to hear us? Are you perhaps able to put something into the chat so we so we know where you are? Okay. Afraid we seem to have completely lost Jared's audio. I don't know if he can hear us, and we certainly can't hear him. Okay. Maybe just give it a moment to see if he can return. Otherwise, we may need to move on to our next speaker and perhaps return to him. I'll just give it a few more moments. No, I'm afraid that doesn't seem to be working. Can I just confirm that the rest of the attendees can hear me all right, so it's not on my end?
I'm still hearing you. Yes.
Good.
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
can hear you.
That's a good sign.
All good.
Okay then. Forgive me. I'll just forward through these slides then, and we'll perhaps move on to our next speaker as a contingency. Okay, I'm very sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened to Jared. He seemed to be there, but we couldn't hear him. So in fact, we're going to now return to Colin, who's going to give us a bit of an example of some applied knowledge, human factors in an incident investigation. So sorry to kind of shove you back on so quickly, so abruptly, Colin. Are you good to go?
Yeah, I'm good to go. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll continue that way then.
Yeah. Oh, this is the last presentation today, I promise. Right, so following on from the previous one, I've got an actual example here of an incident this is an actual incident that occurred, and we started off with the human factors very much up front as part of the incident investigation, so it allowed us to progress very quickly and get a real good depth of understanding. Right, so the actual incident happened earlier this year on one of our assets. There was a project ongoing for a flow line replacement spring hanger, and a scaffolding lifting frame had been erected approximately 11 meters up in the up above a deck, up in the gods there, and the work party were replacing the spring hanger. They'd already taken the old one out, which was of the same magnitude of weight, of 300 kgs. But as they were lifting the new one up, they just got up to the top of where the lift frame was going to get used. Get up and they were ready to start cross hauling when the whole lot came crashing down. A significant incident, a high potential. If anyone had been underneath there, it would have been extremely serious injuries involved, if not a fatality. On the plus side, we did have people outside everyone was outside the exclusion zone, etc. So everyone was standing where they needed to be. But one of the key things that we hear is we quite often consider drop load. We never really consider that much about all the scaffolding arrangement coming down. We were very, very lucky with this one. Very, very minor damage, but it could have been so much worse. So we went through a full investigation. We had the HSE involved. The HSE went and had a look at it as well, and we've had lots of consultation with them on this. But we're at the point where we're able to actually share this. This is only sort of certain details of it, and it's focused on the human factors and what we've actually, one of the key things we've actually done here. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Caroline. So some of the background information, that the lift plan itself was actually of a decent quality lift plan, and it had good detail for the task. However, even though they had it written on the lift plan what they were going to do and what the lift points were and how they were getting used, there was no evidence of communication to the scaffolding team of what was actually going to what they was going to get used with. As such, the advanced scaffolder that was on the asset, he didn't actually contact his onshore support for any design assistance. Part of that was because of this misconception that there was a light load. It was 300 kgs, and he didn't twig that there was cross-hauling involved. All the parties involved, they were all actually very experienced people in their own trades, but ultimately the lift frame scaffold that we were using had not been erected in accordance with the Scaffold Company QA control standard schemes. So if we just go to the next slide, please. So on the left-hand side is we did a mock-up as part of the investigation. We did a mock-up of how it had been erected. It would have withstood 300 kgs in a single as a single lift, but not with any cross hauling. It doesn't actually conform to the Scaffolding Company standard designs and procedures, so it's not actually a particularly good scaffold. What we did do, because we had a lot of engagement with the Scaffolding Company afterwards, and they mocked up the drawing on the right, is to show you what should have been built. So it's a double tube arrangements, lots and lots of diagonal bracings rather than the single bracing that they've got there. So we can go to the next slide, please. So, like I say, we run this through human factors. We've got human factors and specialists involved very, very early with this. And this time we have a different set of factors that came out of the investigation. So in terms of the individual factors, there was quite a lot in there. What we actually found was there was a lack of discussion regarding the intended usage of the lift frame scaffold, with particular intent for the crosshaul. There was anecdotal evidence, from the interviews, the rigger saying, "Well, I told the scaffolder," and the scaffolder says, "That's not what you told me," but they hadn't actually documented it. Part of that we actually managed to uncover is that they knew each other, they were used to working with each other, but that actually allowed them to take things a wee bit too much for granted. They hadn't adequately communicated to each other what was required. There were several job factors that came out of it. It was a very difficult area to actually scaffold, but it was possible to do it correctly. And then another job factor we identified is that the actual old hangar had been removed the day before without any incident. It had gone as planned, but in hindsight, they were lucky. It could have easily have come down on the removal of the old one. So then when we took that back to look at the organisational factors here, it's a case of how have we ended up with two very experienced trades putting up a situation, creating a scaffold here and using it in such a way that is actually unsafe. And what we actually found was there was a misconception. We found this within our company, within our own procedures. It was a wake-up call for myself and quite a few others as well, in that we were operating in this grey area. We were going, oh yeah, anything under a ton, we can leave it to the local scaffolders to go and work within their schemes. Great, if you've got that, but you need to have it documented. You need to have it controlled, because from the Scaffold Company, they've gone, yeah, even if it's under a ton, the way it gets used is absolutely crucial as well. And we missed that within our procedures and all our conversation, our mindset within the lifting world. When you look back on it, I think we were very lucky we didn't have this incident before, in that we were reliant on advanced scaffolders to take what we thought and build the right thing. But really nice, clear definition. Yeah, really nice, clear limit that if it's above a ton, there's no question it goes on shore and gets engineered. But this grey area that we actually identified, we actually speaking to a few other operators, they've had the same thing. They've had this grey area. So that was a gap that we identified had to be closed. So we've got the next slide, please. So what we've actually done now, we've actually closed this gap. We initially put in the starting point was that any low lift frame scaffold would have to get engineered on the beach. We put that in as a temporary measure while we stopped and assessed. That then put a massive burden on our scaffolding contractors in that they were not able to process things quickly enough. So we've been working through with them. We've been learning about how they actually do their standard designs, how they actually work through everything. And it's yeah, if you have a scaffolding contractor, it's well worth having a good engagement with them to run through their procedures, make sure you understand how they communicate with their personnel, and do a wee bit of a mini audit. Make sure that their personnel then understand what they need to do. See if you've got a grey area. So what we've actually done, yeah, we've had lots of consultations with the end users, with the offshore, with the OIMs, with the scaffolding companies, with the scaffolders, and with the lifted personnel. And we've come up with what we're calling a lift frame scaffold control form. And well, it looks like a fairly hefty form. It's not. So the process flow to go with that is that the person who's actually developing the lift plan, it's write down what you actually need from a lift frame scaffold. If you've identified it, write it down on the scaffold on the form and pass it to your advanced scaffolder. The stuff in yellow is the advanced scaffolder. He will look at it. If he's got sufficient detail, great. If he's not got sufficient detail, pass it back. Don't accept it until you've got the information you need. Then you can have a look and see if your criteria for standard designs met. If it's met, because the standard designs that scaffolding companies have are actually very detailed and it tells you what you can and can't use. If you can meet that standard design, great. That's what you record on the sheet and say, I'm going to build this in accordance with this design. If not, if it's something bespoke, then it goes back on the beach for the scaffold design company to go and design it in accordance with their procedures. We're not interfering with anyone's QA procedures. They're all very competent companies. But we get to the point where we have a scaffold design ready to actually then submit with the permit and the lift plan. And then the next phase is when it comes to actually do the preparation for the lift, because we can prepare permits well in advance and lift plans well in advance. When it comes to the actual physical work, the scaffold gets built to the design, and then we have the review with the lifting team. And nice, simple decision there. Have that conversation. Does that scaffold meet the requirements of the lift plan? Yes, great. Both of you sign it, put the SCAF tag number on there, and we'll progress from there. If not, nice and clear, stop and reassess. So we got to the, yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah, and not everyone would have seen the new mechanical handling guidelines coming out, but we've actually got a clause in the new mechanical handling guidelines which this now meets. This hasn't been issued as yet, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to actually give everyone a heads up as to what's coming. So, you know, when you've got the use of uncertified structural steel or lift frame scaffold, make sure it's been identified and all necessary verifications have been documented. So that's what we're actually doing with our new lift frame scaffold control sheet. But we wouldn't have got to quite a pragmatic solution without going down the human factors route. If we just left it up to the process people, it would have been pages and pages and pages. But this one works for all parties. Okay, any questions?
That's great, Colin. Thank you very much. And it's good to see a kind of a worked example where you've managed to apply the human factors. Any beg your pardon, I have a couple of questions here. Ian, you have your hand up.
Morning all. Carolyn, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Not so much a question, just more of a comment. I thought that was really well presented and great to see a practical example being used along with the human factors side. Just two documents I'm sure a lot of people know, but HSG 48 on human factors and a document from the Energy Institute on making compliance easier. Two documents we've used, especially around incidents and investigations. So it's worthwhile getting a copy of them if you don't already. But again, yep, thanks for sharing that example. It's really good.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ian. So we have someone querying why the lack of discussion would come under being an individual factor. I guess that's being discrete from a sort of job or organizational thing.
Yeah, how would it come in? It was more the team interactions, and the way we're kind of looking at it, that was a stepping stone to help us get to the where we needed to be in terms of getting the new process in place. Whether it was an individual factor or an organizational factor, like I said earlier, I'm not a human factors expert. For me, I think it was key that it was identified as a factor. Whether it fits in one of the other columns better, then fine. Yeah, it was fine.
Okay, so just a couple of bits. Someone is asking if you'd be prepared to share your scaffold consultation sheet. I guess that's an internal document for yourselves at Harbour, is that correct?
It is, however, it's we'll be sharing this presentation. There's a copy there in the presentation, so people can make their own version.
Yep, as long as you're happy to do that.
Yeah.
Also,
What
someone
would say, sorry, just if you are going to do that, have that conversation with your scaffolding service company to make sure that they are that they're buying into it and that the wording matches theirs. So rather than just take
communication.
Yeah.
Right. And a couple of people wondering where they could get links to the documents that Ian had mentioned. If you, oh, brilliant, he's put them up there. Also, Colin had referred to some of the human factors material on the Step Change and Safety website. So you can go to, it was the second quarterly theme of 2022. It is generic, but it's broken down into nice bite-sized chunks. So either if you want to use it as training material or a bit of information for yourself. We also created an e-learning on Mintra. So the link is on our webpage and that will take you to that. It's free to go on, sign up, and you get a little certificate at the end of it. It's more of a kind of knowledge check than an accredited thing, but nice just to be able to get a bit of information, maybe contribute to CPD or anything else that you're doing. Thank you for that, Colin. Just in the interest of keeping things moving, Jared, were you able to rejoin us?
I am back. Yes, it seemed to be a technical issue, but I wasn't sure if I was just on the big red chair on Graham Norton and you decided to press the button.
No. I'm so sorry for the interruption to your talk there. I think perhaps it was a Teams issue because we could
there we go.
see you there, but we couldn't quite hear what you were saying, and I was busting to hear what the ambassador said.
Right. Okay. So he was going to be speaking on education, and he was taking a drink of water, but unfortunately it wasn't water. It ended up being hand sanitizer. But he was okay. But the point of that slide is just to emphasize that we can misselect things when things are confusingly similar. So if we just go to the next slide, please. Then wrong selection, whether it's a switch, a lever, a cab, a button in a cab, sorry, or a sling or a container of oil can lead to problems. So if we just move on to the next slide. Okay, I don't know. You'll be showing you your age if you do remember these guys.
Is it Chris Cross?
Oh, there you go, Colin. Well done. Top of the class. So this is Chris Cross, and can you remember what their visual statement was?
No idea.
Okay, so if you look at their clothes are back to front, which inspired a whole load of guys in the 80s to wear their jumpers back to front, thinking it was a fashion statement, and it never looked good. Anyway, what I'm trying to speak about here is, if you go to the next slide, it's just wrong position, and wrong position is another one of those 6 key ways that things can go wrong. So examples would be people in the line of fire, a part fitted the wrong way around. You can think of valves being left open or closed. And all these things are really just concepts or ideas that we can have that start conversations. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so just to recap, what we've got there is, I've actually, if we were doing this in the room all together, then it would be a matching exercise, and I would ask you, okay, so number 1, that icon is related to wrong amount. Number 2, that one is missing or forgotten, not done. Number 3, wrong order. Number 4, timing. Number 5, an incorrect selection, and number 6 would be the wrong position. So you might be asking yourself, so what? It's all fine and well knowing that things can go wrong. We all know things can go wrong, but how does that actually help? Well, if you're doing something that's non-routine, like a complex lift, or you have someone new to the team, then you can ask questions when you're doing your planning, when you're having a toolbox talk about what can go wrong in terms of the wrong amount, the wrong selection, the wrong position, etc. Much in the same ways that if we were doing a risk assessment or toolbox talk, we might talk about the hazards of electricity, gravity, and chemical. So it can be useful to just start thinking about human factors of possible unplanned events, which isn't really something that we typically do in a focused and structured way. But as much as it can be useful to highlight how things can go wrong, if we stop there, as we've kind of probably made clear through the whole of this morning, is we're really only at surface level. So we need to try and understand why things don't go to plan. And I'm going to make a bold statement that most of the time when things don't go to plan, we're going to find 3 common themes or reasons. And the 3 themes are related to memory, attention, and decision making. Now, to take a little detour to the side, it's important to say that human factors does consider ergonomics in the strictest sense of the word of ergonomics. So that includes things like workstation design, how the physical body can be damaged through repetitive motion, or how things can be situated so they're easier and quicker to reach and use. But right now, I think it's useful for us to draw attention to human factors and how things go right or wrong, depending on what goes on in our heads. I'm going to take a guess that your last lifting incident was related to something someone forgot, something someone didn't notice, or someone decided to do something, they made a decision and it didn't work out. So if we go to the next slide. So what we can say is that we are just fallible information processing beings. Are we going to say that humans are the problem? Well, no. The problem is placing people in situations when we don't take into consideration memory, attention, and decision making. So the problem is far more the situation than the person who makes the action error. Okay, so as you can see, the limitations that we have within our attention, our memory, and decision making can lead to those unwanted outcomes. Okay, next slide, please, Carolyn. Okay, next slide again. Okay, so definitely we've made the point that the humans aren't the problem. In fact, humans are the solution. So one, if you want to know why someone's struggling, then we need to speak to people and ask them, what makes this job difficult? What makes it so that you struggle? What makes it difficult to remember or pay attention? What's confusing? So it's really, you can't think of humans as the problem. You need to be thinking of humans as the solution to the challenges that we have. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Imagine you were selected to go on the TV show Who Dares Wins, where they put you under grueling tests and they deliberately try to get you to fail. I would ask, what conditions would have made spot the difference more difficult? So let's have a look at some answers that I've had in the past. So if we go to the next slide. Well, we could have didn't spot the difference when people are physically tired, when they're mentally exhausted. It makes me think of short change, being offshore. Are you really at your best when you're tired, when you're fatigued? How about trying to do something when you are constantly interrupted and you lose your place or line of thought? What about if you'd never played Spot the Difference before and the instructions were unclear, so you didn't understand what was required? Or you struggled to hear the instructions because of background noise, or if it might, as referred to earlier on, if the instructions were communicated using poor, crackly radios. What if there wasn't enough time given and you were told that this must be done or else there'd be negative consequences? So we have what we call these performance shaping factors, and I know that we've referred to these earlier on. We spoke about job factors, we spoke about individual factors and organizational factors, but it gives us some idea of the things that we can be looking at that make things more difficult for our colleagues. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, great. So we can start to take a wider view than simply someone messed up, and an even wider view than someone messed up because they forgot, because they zoned out, or they made an incorrect decision. We can start to consider the situations and understand the bigger picture. Okay, next slide, please. So we can start to have a more educated and informed way of looking at how we set people up for success. And I think it might have been Colin earlier on that actually used that term, setting people up for success. So let's go to the next slide. So really, if you're going to think about human factors, then human factors is about making sure people have the right tools, instruction, and environment so they're less likely to make mistakes. For example, empowering team members to control the pace of work instead of feeling pressured, and encouraging people to focus on one thing instead of multitasking, and making sure that we have planned pauses and bite-sized information when we're doing a longer job, or we're doing something that we've not done for a while, or we have a crew member, which were all items that were covered in our earlier case studies. Again, is the team tired? If so, there's some jobs that we're better scheduling for early tomorrow morning, and so on. So again, what we're getting across is that human factors is not about blaming the end user who happens to be at the sharp end with their hands on the wrong type of oil as it goes into the engine. It's about having a structured, considered, supportive environment so fluff ups are less likely in the first place. So we spent a bit of time talking about wrong this, wrong that, but we have those conversations, so we place people in positions where they're more likely to succeed, while understanding that we have capabilities and limitations with it in how we think our cognitive abilities and the situation, the positive performance shaping factors that we can put in place. I know that we've spoken about, just having those clear procedures is so important. Okay, so next slide, please. So the ideal situation is where people, whether it's managers, supervisors, or frontline workers, are familiar with performance shaping factors. It's part of the vocabulary and the dialogue and the culture of an organization. So they're able to see situations arise and recognize negative shaping factors as triggers. And at that point, they can say, well, we need to change this. For example, if the team starts to feel rushed, the supervisor can say we need to take a time out. Or if there's a lousy procedure, let's get it changed. And they feel empowered to do that. So let's go to the next slide. So triggers include those performance shaping factors, but they also include recognizing the potential of things to be misselected. For example, if your M8 and M9 bolts are placed on a shelf close to each other and the boxes look identical, can we improve the lighting on the shelf? Can we change the appearance of the boxes? Or do we need to document the potential for misselection of the wrong bolts in the risk assessment or the toolbox documentation? Can we do this so that action error is less likely? So all these are trigger points or hold points that we can use. So we're nearly there. Next slide, please. So by now we should have demystified what human factors is. It's not rocket science, it's not a dark art, and it's not brain surgery. But what I would caution you against is thinking that we already talk about this stuff, so we've got that covered. Perhaps you do, but my experience is that it really depends on who is talking about the factors. So yeah, we've got some good leaders who cover this stuff cover this stuff in a roundabout sort of way, but a lot of times it's based on the experience of an individual leader. Too often these topics are really known about and spoke about in a haphazard way. We don't offer the documentation to support toolbox talks and risk assessments that directly refer to human factors. And we don't have the training and awareness to arm people with the information they need so they're able to say, these are the key performance shaping factors and possible errors that me and my team need to know about, need to be able to recognize. Okay, so in the interest of time, I haven't covered all the common performance shaping factors, but you should have a fair idea, no matter what your experience was of human factors before this morning, of what human factors can involve. So in closing, I know that we can't all go back to the workplace and introduce new human factors tools tomorrow, but we can start off with a few simple questions. So here's some just example questions for you. Is there anything in this job that could be easy to forget? Is there anything in this job that it could be easy not to notice? Or is there anything in this job that it could be easy to confuse? And just asking those simple questions will start to build a team where human factors goes into the fabric and thinking of the way that they work. Okay, so that's it for me, folks. Happy to take any questions to fill any gaps while I've been talking. I don't know, there was a very big gap.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Jared. That's certainly been very useful to sort of understand some of the basic principles. And I guess, as you say, the next step is to try and apply them and sort of integrate them into our existing operations. Do we have any questions from the floor, please? This is your opportunity to ask the experts. Nothing. Again, if you do think of something later, afterwards, when you're kind of thinking about what we've covered this morning, don't hesitate to drop me a line, and we'll see if we can get your questions answered. Oh, we have a question here. Sorry. Why incidents are happening to experienced employees and routine tasks? It's a question.
If you're going to talk about experienced and routine tasks, we did refer to it earlier on. It's the routine things that we become desensitized to. So we underestimate the risk. If you've done something 100 times, 1,000 times, and it's never went wrong, even if you are taking a shortcut, then you're going to think that you're going to be fine. So you've got the amount of times that you've done it, you've got the fact that you don't have that attention to detail, you probably haven't had that in-depth toolbox talk, and you don't necessarily have that level of vigilance. And what you find as well, if we're going to talk about people who are highly experienced, they're actually operating where they can do a lot of their work almost on a subconscious basis. So they don't necessarily, they can think about things, they can mind wander and they can still be fine. They can basically daydream. I'm not saying that they should, but they could. Whereas if you are new to a job, if you're a novice, then the chances are, you've got that heightened attention. So we talk about things called slips. So a slip is, we say pulling lever A as opposed to pulling lever B or pressing the wrong button. And for me, I would think about if you're putting, diesel or petrol in a diesel car. It's those high things that you do every day that you actually do on a subconscious effort. So that's a couple of reasons why you're going to find experienced people making those mistakes. And the other thing as well, just to hopefully not go on too much, is when we find people who are highly experienced but have been off the tools and then they get back in the tools. So supervisors, I'm thinking of tool pushers on oil rigs, just basically trying to get involved when they shouldn't be, and instead of stepping back and doing something that actually they've probably lost some of the skill that they've had. So there's some ideas.
And that's interesting because that's what I, as I say, not non-expert, would have called complacency. But I notice you answer that without using the word. And I've been told off before that this is no longer the kind of term that that's used. Also the comment that, so is this a kind of a lack of the sense of chronic unease? You've kind of lost
Yeah.
that.
Well, I'm not a big fan of the sense of of chronic unease. I think it's great at an expert level, but it sends. If we're not careful for our frontline guys, it can make them. It's a term that can present almost a picture of anxiety, and I don't. So I've got mixed feelings. As much as I like what it represents, sometimes I think it can be misunderstood. So we just need to keep educating people around that. Complacency, absolutely, Carolyn. I'm not a fan of the word complacency either, because complacency implies, the dictionary definition is actually correct because it's an underestimation of risk. But the way that people understand it is as carelessness. And I don't think it is carelessness. I think it's far more likely to be over-optimism. And over-optimism is something that we can all be party to. It's just part of our nature and our fabric as human beings.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we'll move on to our last speaker of the day then. Whoops, I beg your pardon. So just to kind of preface this by saying that Trevor's actually just going to give us a bit of an update from the HSE, so not specifically human factors related, but it's very important that we are kind of aware of the HSE's current thinking. So just to introduce Trevor, Trevor started his career as a mechanical engineer, progressing to hold various engineering management positions. He joined the HSE Offshore Division in 1998 as a mechanical engineer inspector. His main focus has been on lifting operations and lifting equipment, and has undertaken countless offshore inspections and investigations. Trevor is now an unwavering member of the Step Change in Safety Lifting Work Group, providing guidance and applying his experience for our wider learning. So passing over to yourself, Trevor.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. I suppose, continuing on the theme of human factors, what I want to talk about is pre-use checks. And I know you mentioned the word complacency. There's always the risk that they're not done correctly, but I'll expand on that further. So first of all, how do we ensure cranes are safe to operate? Well, you maintain them. You know, you do your maintenance as per your planned maintenance scheme. You change your ropes and other things like that. And then you have your thorough examinations. And your thorough examination is really, in essence, to check that the maintenance is being done correctly. And then you have your inspections, and that depends upon, to a certain extent, the design of the crane. Maybe spline inspections. It'll certainly be your inspections of your wire ropes. And then the final one is the pre-use checks. Next slide, please, Carolyn. Right, so pre-use checks, what's the purpose of them? Well, really, the purpose is to pick up any faults. And these are faults that are developed through day-to-day wear and tear. And it's also to identify any malfunction of safety-related equipment. And you could consider that these checks are really the first line of defence in ensuring the crane is safe to operate. And some people might argue it's the last line of defence, because if you have all those other measures that I previously mentioned, your last line of defence is indeed checking that the crane is safe to operate by the pre-use checks. Next slide, Carolyn. Right, I want to talk about a recent incident that we had, which involved the failure of the internal brake on a crane boom hoist gearbox. This crane was fitted with a Braden CH280 hoist, and the internal Sprague clutch, which engaged the internal static brake, had failed. These design of gearboxes are quite common, certainly on the second generation of hydraulic cranes. And the design is such that when you boom up, the Sprague clutch revolves at free wheels and allows you to boom up. As soon as you stop booming up, the Sprague, due to the weight of the boom, trying to push the boom back down, the sprag revolves in the other direction and the internal rotating elements of the sprag lock up. And when they lock up, they bring into play an internal static brake. And this internal static brake has brake discs, and you actually release them hydraulically, and that then allows the boom to lower. Now, this type of hoist also has an external ratchet pole, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And on this particular crane, the pin was missing in the linkage, and therefore the external pole was not being able to provide the safety feature that it should have been able to provide. Now, this was discovered at the start of a thorough examination, believe it or not. The competent person was starting to do a boom inspection. Now, normally when you start a thorough examination, you start at the pedestal and work your way up. On this occasion, because of the forecast of strong winds, the inspector decided he would start by doing his boom inspection. So the boom had positioned over a walkway. He was climbing up. He climbed up onto the boom, and his weight was sufficient to cause the boom to start and lower, and it actually lowered in an uncontrolled manner and damaged some handrails on a walkway. So that was the incident. Now, the key point of this one was that the failure of the internal sprag appears to be a result of oil contamination. The crane operators must report any changes in the behavior of the crane. Because the internal brake wasn't working, because the sprag had failed, the crane driver was aware that in the neutral position of his controls, the boom was creeping down. This was certainly an indication of the internal static brake not functioning. So the crunch one is the pre-use checks failed to identify that the external pole was working. You know, this is something which was readily observable. For some reason, it hadn't been identified, and neither had the aspect of the crane creeping down when the control lever was in neutral, neither had that been followed up either. So next slide, Carolyn. So this is not the first time we've had problems with gearboxes of this design where the internal sprag internal pole has failed. This was Heather way back in 2004. Not the same type of crane as I was describing, but the same design of gearbox where you had a sprag which brought into play the internal brake. Now on this crane, the crane operator had been operating the crane, and yes, he was aware there was a slight creeping of the boom when the control lever was in neutral, indicating that the internal static brake wasn't functioning correctly. But it was approaching his lunch time, and he positioned the crane over the top of the rest. He didn't put the boom down in the rest. He actually positioned it over in the rest in a boom up position. He switched the crane off. Everything was switched off, isolated, started to walk, came down, climbed down from the crane cab, walked across the main deck when he heard a slight noise behind him. He turned around only to see the boom was starting to come down. He ran back towards the crane. I don't know what he was intending to do, but he ran back and suddenly realized there was absolutely nothing he could do because the boom was coming down at a rapid speed, at which time it hit the boom rest, broke its back, ripped the boom hoist winch system off the top of the crane and threw it across into the sea. So this one was the last incident I was talking to you about, where it was discovered that there was a fault on the crane. It could have resulted in a similar situation as this. In other words, a collapsed boom. Now on this one, yes, the internal brake wasn't working, but also the external pole, there was a hydraulic fault on it, and the pole was not allowed to be, it wouldn't engage. It would only engage after a considerable period of time. So that's how this incident occurred. So the next slide, Carolyn, please. So going back, we've had 3 recent crane incidents. There was this one that I've just described, which fortunately was identified during a thorough examination, but it could have resulted in a boom collapse, just as what happened on Heather. On the other two incidents where we had boom collapses, the boom hoist ropes had failed as a consequence of the damage caused to them by running for a period of time off a sheave. The ropes, for a number of possibilities, had come off a sheave and the rope had been running on a shaft. So you've got to ask yourselves, why did the pre-use checks not identify, first of all, the pole linkage was disconnected, or going back to the Heather, that the pole wasn't engaging? And why didn't I identify that the boom hoist ropes were not running over a sheave? You know, that should have been, both of these should have been readily observable. So you've got to ask yourself the question, is there something wrong with the pre-use checks that are being undertaken? Next slide, Carolyn. So what I'm asking is, I'm asking you to look at your pre-use checks that you undertake on your cranes, and make sure the check sheet focuses on verifying the correct operations of the safety related functions and equipment on the crane. That's what the pre-use check should focus on, the safety aspects of the crane, to make sure they are operating correctly. And the next one is, ensure the crane operators understand the importance of checking these and do not see them as a tick box exercise. So this is the human factors part of it, making sure the crane operators understand why they're doing it, why it has to be done, what would happen if something goes wrong with these items they're supposed to check. So in other words, you know, you didn't like to use the word complacency. So in other words, complacency doesn't creep in where the crane operator is simply sitting in his cab, goes through his checklist, ticks all the boxes, and yeah, everything's all right. I don't need to go out and check things. That's what you've got to try to avoid and overcome. The only way you can do that is to make sure that they're focused and the crane operators understand why they're doing them. And finally, it's to ensure that there's a system in place to monitor these completed checklists. So in other words, if the crane operator spots something, that it is indeed followed up by the management and corrective actions are taken. And I think that's it, Carolyn. If anyone has any questions, please.
That's wonderful. Thank you. It's strange now I'm looking at it, although this was kind of more of an alert for information rather than part of the Human Factors Forum. I can actually see it's scattered with human factors. So yes, Martin, a question from yourself.
Yeah, more of a shared experience observation. I mean, the last 2 points in particular is that a few years ago, I was on an installation and running through exactly this pre-use checks with a crane operator. And it also comes back to some of the earlier questions there, that the people involved were so experienced that they knew what they were looking for, but there was no recording of these. It wasn't even a tick box exercise. They didn't even tick it. And this must have been condoned under the supervision, because all they had to do was update a weekly spreadsheet with their findings. So there was no recording of their exercises, what they were doing on a daily basis, just sort of like making a reference if they spotted anything into a spreadsheet. So it does come back to human factors as well, with the leaderships, the systems, and all, as beyond having the people understand the necessity of why these systems are in place and why they have to do it.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Quite right. Thank you. I guess I would just then open the floor for questions to any of our expert panel today. So we have Andrea, Colin, Jared and Trevor all available for any kind of final questions or comment. And if there's nothing immediate, I might tender a question on behalf of someone I'd actually talked to yesterday. They were inquiring what the HSE would be looking for in terms of evidencing human factors in lifting at inspection. Would you have any thoughts on that?
Dear me, no, not really. I mean, I'm not a human factors specialist. I have very little knowledge of human factors. I would just go back to what I said about the pre-use checks, that we would just want to make sure that whatever systems are in place are being followed, and that they're documented and they are being audited.
I think I absolutely understand you kind of each have your discrete areas of expertise. I think it's probably more difficult when you are the person being regulated. It maybe feels less kind of joined up if on, you know, a lifting inspection you're asked to evidence what you're doing in terms of human factors, but there's not perhaps any you know, good practice or nothing that you could directly refer to. I don't know if that's correct or if I've perhaps missed something. Kevin, you have your hand up.
Yes, just a quick one there. I guess it's, I was at a DROPS forum last week, and the HSE had been, so for example, I work for platforms, but some of the folk that were at the DROPS forum last week work for modules. And some of the inspections they've been getting recently from the HSE were looking at lifting operations and wanted to see human factors in their documentation.
Yeah.
So one of the members last week at the DROPS forum from Repsol was kind of asking if the industry was going to do anything. And I said I would raise it at the stage because I remember this forum was coming up and I'd signed up for it. And it was specifically on lifting operations and human factors. So the documentation, what I'm trying to get at is the documentation that Step Change created, which is mechanical handling document, which we use here at KCA Deutag as part of our lifting operations. It's like reference documentation, etc. But the question from these guys was, well, will Step Change be updating this document to incorporate human factors? Because maybe it's a time to get that into there. I don't know. It's just a question.
Yes. So we are obviously under review of the document at the moment, as Colin had mentioned. It doesn't specifically cover human factors, although it is being looked at by representatives from our human factors work group, so that we can kind of include their insights. From myself at Step Change, you know, we could provide good or best practice and hope that organisations use it. For me, it would be almost looking to the HSE to see more of a joined up approach from themselves, rather than it being a lifting thing or a human factors thing or a whatever else. You know, it should be a sort of more integrated thing. It shouldn't be lifting plus a bit of human factors on top. It should absolutely be integrated, and it's really something more integrated we're looking for, I imagine.
Yeah,
Again, please correct me if I'm not understanding the situation.
I would never dare to correct you. So firstly, so I mean, getting back to the things, when I mean, obviously the first steps in human factors came out, we looked at HSG 48. So in my company, I think we're really quite mature now in relation to when we have an incident. We investigate it using these tools and keep these things in mind. But I guess for the other parties, we're working now on trying to evolve into the, for example, we've got human factors mentioned, our TBTs, but now it's into the risk assessment. So we're trying to get it into most of the things that we can do to make sure we help as much as we can to get the human side of any task we do thought about before the task commences. So I don't know, it's just a question.
No, I think you're quite right. And getting the front line to kind of get a comprehension of human factors too, because it's one thing to say, you know, toolbox talk or whatever, you know, consider human factors. Well,
yeah,
we need some training, or what is it I'm looking for? Especially if, like, as Colin kind of referred to, it's maybe more of a technical kind of fraternity, and maybe what we historically considered softer skills are less familiar. Chris.
Yeah, Carl, it was just really in response to Kevin's question there, and it starts to sometimes kind of a game for my closing comments, to be honest, but since we're chatting about it now, I'll throw it in. I think collectively as an industry, we're a little bit behind the curve on human factors, whether it's overlooked or is it still misunderstood by this particular industry. I know it's been heavily adopted by, for example, the aviation. But do we really need to, instead of looking at like specific groups as in step change HSE, do we as an industry really need to better integrate human factors into our training and assessment standards? Because at the end of the day, we all use them. And within our operating procedures, as Colin alluded to earlier, I think a lot of our companies are very guilty of having 10 particular documents that pertain to lifting, for example, where maybe 2 would be more easily followed and understood by the teams who are utilising them. Again, it's just possible that that's maybe where we target, as opposed to particular organisations, that we collectively look at the training assessment standards, include human factors, i.e. your decision making, situational awareness, because that's ultimately all the incidents that we've heard about today: communication, situational awareness, and particularly decision making are the 3 non-technical skills which are prevalent in all incidents for me.
That's it, and they're just not covered in your technical standards. Yeah,
no,
that's great.
No, so our training is right now very heavily focused on the technical aspect.
Absolutely.
That's great. You come back every 2 years, 3 years, or whatever, and refresh that and be assessed against the standard for your technical element. What about as a banksman, for example? What really do you need to do as a banksman? You communicate your situational awareness and your decision making, because each and every single lift is different. Each and every single day is different in respect of environmental conditions. So I think maybe we need to start looking at that element.
Absolutely. There's some good kind of food for thought for our future projects. Chris, just since you're kind of on the line there, I wonder if you perhaps had a couple of closing comments, just as our lifting work group co-chair.
That was pretty much it, Carly. No, no, well, it's just echo what other comments in the side there. There's been several comments there, and a big thank you to the speakers today. Really appreciate you giving up your time and coming along and presenting to ourselves. And it is really greatly appreciated. And again, obviously for myself, human factors is a big thing for me. Really, I'd have this every time in our forums, because I think it's really needed in the industry. Again, also thank you to the attendees, several of you globally, which is great to see. It gives us a good bit of support globally that we're getting the message out there across the globe, especially those that have got up extremely early at 3 o'clock in the morning to come and attend. And obviously the participation, a lot of good questions and integration from the audience. So thank you again. I guess really closing for me, I'm certain that today will have generated various thoughts and things that we can take away to our own organisations and look to see where we can adopt some more human factors and try and push that on a little bit. Thank you.